You're just a bully in an expensive suit. I told the wrong twin now. The real mafia boss won't. The Boston rain fell in silver threads, stitching the dark harbor to the sky. From the top floor of the Institute, the city looked like a circuit board slicked with mercury. This was the kind of night that made the new money feel old and the old money feel immortal. Noelle Hart felt neither. She felt exposed. The black dress she wore was borrowed, the silk pulling too tight across her shoulders. A silent judgment from a life she'd purposefully left behind. She was supposed to be analyzing spreadsheets in a quiet office, not navigating a ballroom full of tailored sharks. But Noelle was here on a promise. She had been forced to attend the Waterfront Innovation Fund Gala, a glittering display of philanthropy that Noelle knew, from agonizing experience, was a lie. She'd spent 3 years at the Inner Integrity Office, the IO, tracing the ghost money that slithered out of city contracts. She knew exactly how much innovation cost the people left behind. She was here for 2 reasons. The first was public to corner a donor, any donor, and convince them to save the Seaport Commons, the subsidized housing project where her mother had lived, the project that had burned, taking her mother with it, because the maintenance funds had vanished. The second reason was private. The money hadn't just vanished. It had been moved, siphoned through a complex network of shell companies, all leading back to one name, the Harbor Light Trust, the hosts of tonight's gala. Noelle had quit the IIO when the investigation was officially deprioritized. She had opened Hart Ledger Analytics, a tiny forensic accounting firm above a bakery, to finish the job herself, tonight. She wasn't just a guest, she was a hunter. Through the tall glass wall of the main corridor, she saw him. He was framed against the rainy skyline, a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection. He was listening to a city councilman, and he had a smile that was disarmingly soft, almost gentle. It was the face of modern philanthropy. It was the face of Julian Rhodes. Noelle's blood went hot, then cold. That was him. The man whose digital signature was the final link in the chain, the one who approved the transfers that starved the commons. She moved. Her borrowed heels made no sound on the plush carpet as she cut through the polite laughter and the scent of expensive perfume. She reached him as he was turning away from the councilman, that easy smile still in place. "Mr. Rhodes." He turned fully to her, the smile deepening. "Julian, please, can I help you?" Noelle didn't smile back. From her small clutch, she pulled a plain manila envelope. It had been delivered by messenger to her new office that morning. Inside was $10,000 in crisp bills, attached to a note suggesting a consulting fee for her silence on Harbor Light's city contracts. She pressed the envelope flat against the fine wool of his suit jacket. His smile faltered, replaced by genuine confusion. His hands came up, hovering, not touching her or the envelope. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "I'm not for sale," Noelle said, her voice a low, vicious tremor. The grief and rage she had banked for 6 months finally broke containment. She pushed the envelope again, harder. He stumbled back a half step. "You're just a bully in an expensive suit," she seethed, close enough now that only he could hear. "You think you can throw money at me. You think that fixes what your innovation did. People died in that fire. My mother died." Julian's face was pale, his hands still raised. "Ma'am, I have no idea what you're talking about. I think there's been a terrible—" A shadow detached itself from the alcove nearby. The air temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. The newcomer was identical to Julian. Same height, same carved jawline, same dark hair. But where Julian was charcoal gray and soft smiles, this man was midnight black and Arctic ice. His suit was darker, his presence heavier. Where Julian was the public face, this man was the center of gravity. He stopped beside Julian, but his eyes were locked on Noelle. He wasn't just looking at her, he was dissecting her. This was Cassian Rhodes, the twin brother, the one with no public profile, no digital footprint, the one the IAO suspected was the real boss of the Harbor Light Trust. Cassian leaned in. He didn't invade her space. Not quite. He occupied it, displacing the very air she needed to breathe. She could smell the cold night on his coat. He watched her chest rise and fall beneath the black silk. 1 breath, 2. He was counting her heartbeats, cataloging her fear. His voice was a low rumble, utterly devoid of the warmth his brother possessed. "You spoke to the wrong man." Julian let out a shaky breath. "Cassian, this woman is... she's making accusations." Cassian didn't look at his brother. He raised a single finger, and Julian fell silent. His cold gaze returned to Noelle. "You come to my event. You accuse my family. You attempt to pass an unauthorized payment." He gave a nearly imperceptible nod to 2 men in dark suits standing by the entrance. They began to move. "Detain her. She's a hazardous entry." Noelle's blood ran cold. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a sentence. The guards were flanking her, their movements smooth and practiced. She was trapped. A sudden, piercing shriek split the air, the fire alarm. Strobe lights began to flash, painting the opulent room in frantic pulses of red. The polite chatter shattered into panic. Guests surged, a wave of velvet and diamonds toward the main exits. Noelle reacted instantly, pivoting, using the chaos as cover. She blended into the surge, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was almost at the main stairwell, almost free. A hand landed on her waist. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't violent. It was firm, possessive, and inescapable. A soft cuff. She froze. "Cassian?" He was directly behind her, his body a solid wall, moving with the crowd as if he were the current and she were just driftwood. His hand steered her, not toward the main exit with the others, but toward a narrow, unmarked service corridor. "Not that way," he murmured, his breath a warm shock against the shell of her ear. The heavy steel door of the corridor slammed shut behind them, muffling the alarm to a dull, distant pulse. They were alone in the sterile concrete passage. His hand did not leave her waist. His fingers were spread wide, pressing her back against the solid line of his body. He held her, not in comfort, but in control. "From now on," Cassian Rhodes said, his voice a final, chilling verdict in the sudden quiet, "I decide where you go." He pulled her through the rear exit, out into the biting, relentless rain. Noelle looked back, catching sight of the gala's massive, glowing neon sign, its reflection fractured in a deep, oily puddle at her feet. The letters shimmered, twisting in the downpour until the name became a distorted, 3-part warning. Hair, bore, light. The meeting Cassian Rhodes had forced was not a meeting. It was an interrogation. He had put her in the back of a black car, driven her not to a police station, but to a sterile, windowless room in the sublevels of his waterfront tower. And then he let her go. Just like that, no explanation. Now, 2 days later. Noelle sat in her own office, the small, rented space above a bakery that housed Hart Ledger Analytics. The air smelled of stale coffee and fresh bread. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of the Harbor Light Trust. She was staring at a digital map on her screen, a complex web of transactions. It was the web that had cost her mother's life. The memory was sharp, tasting of ash and guilt. The fire at the Seaport Commons had been blamed on faulty wiring, a tragedy. The city called it, but Noelle knew it was negligence. The maintenance funds, specifically 3 large disbursements meant for electrical upgrades, had been rerouted. At the IEO, she had followed the money. Her gut had clenched when the trail, which was supposed to be a simple municipal audit, burrowed deep into the private sector. The funds had been washed through 3 distinct shell companies, each layer more opaque than the last, until they landed in a holding account for Rhodes Maritime Holdings, a subsidiary of the Harbor Light Trust. Her superiors at the IIO had seen the name and flinched. The case was shut down within 48 hours, citing a lack of jurisdiction. Noelle had cleaned out her desk the next day. Hart Ledger. Analytics was born from the ashes of that file. Her investigation had continued. unpaid and obsessive. The money from Rhodes Maritime didn't just sit, it moved again into a bonded warehouse, Pier Arcadia, a black box on the water. A polite knock echoed on her office's frosted glass door. Noelle minimized the screen. "It's open." The door swung inward, and Julian Rhodes stood there, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. He wore a cashmere sweater, the picture of casual remorse. The easy smile she remembered from the gala was gone, replaced by a look of careful sincerity. "Miss Hart, Noelle, I wanted to apologize," he said, stepping inside. "My behavior at the gala was, well, I was confused, and my brother..." He winced. "Cassian can be severe. I hope they didn't treat you too badly." "They let me go," Noelle said, her voice flat. She did not motion for him to sit. "Good. That's good." He placed the coffees on her desk, a peace offering she had no intention of accepting. "Look, I did some checking. About your mother, about the Commons. It's terrible. What you said. It stuck with me. I spoke to Cassian. He wants to see you. Properly this time. He wants to explain." "Explain what?" Noelle asked. "How his company launders money while people die." Julian's gaze was steady. "He's the only one who can answer that. He's the right person to talk to. Please, half an hour." The Harbor Light Trust headquarters was a monument of glass overlooking the bay, designed to reflect the sky and hide everything within. Noelle was led not to a sublevel, but to the penthouse conference room. The view was staggering. Cassian was already there, standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, a dark silhouette against the bright morning. Julian was not present. "Mr. Rhodes," Noelle said, keeping her voice level. He turned. His eyes were just as cold as she remembered. He gestured to the vast, polished table. "Sit." She did not. "I'm not here for a job interview. Your brother said you had an explanation." "I have a proposition," Cassian corrected. He walked to the table and, from a slim leather portfolio, fanned out a set of documents, 12 bank statements. "You are a good forensic accountant, Miss Hart. You found the shell companies. You found Rhodes Maritime. You found Pier Arcadia." He tapped the statements. "But you stopped looking too soon. You were so focused on the money we took. You never tracked the money they gave." Noelle stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her caution. She scanned the top page. The numbers were enormous. "You believe I am siphoning money from the city." Cassian said it was not a question. "And you are correct, but you missed the other side of the ledger." He pointed to a line item, a deposit from an offshore account. "This is from the IIO's own discretionary fund, a blind trust, laundered poorly and injected into the Waterfront Innovation Fund." Noelle's breath caught. She saw it now. It wasn't just a siphon. It was a cycle. Harbor Light was a high-powered washing machine, taking dirty money from the city's corrupt officials and, in return, siphoning city funds to their own projects. They were enabling each other. Cassian was draining the Commons, yes, but he was also the preferred banker for the rot inside the IAO itself. "This is a two-way street," Noelle whispered, the scale of it sickening her. "You pump their dirty money into your legitimate projects to make them look clean, and they let you bleed the city budget dry." "Ugh, everyone gets what they want," Cassian said, his voice void of emotion, "except for people like your mother." Noelle recoiled, as if slapped. "I am offering you a 6-week agreement," he said, moving to the head of the table, "an independent consultancy. You work inside Harbor Light. You will have access to our books. I want you to find the person inside my system who authorized the Commons diversion, the one who got sloppy, the one who got greedy. And if I do, if you prove who in my network is stealing from me and covering it up with city negligence, I will personally cut them out. I will sever the account, and I will fund the Seaport Commons restoration in full, personally. And if I can't find them, or if it's you," a flicker of something amusement, perhaps in his cold eyes, "if, after 6 weeks, you cannot prove a single actor within my organization is responsible if you decide it is just me, then you walk away. You stop digging into Harbor Light. Forever. And I will still fund the Commons. It was a perfect trap. He won either way. She either found a scapegoat for him, or she took the bribe and silenced herself. Heads you win, tails I lose. Noelle said. Heads or tails, the Commons gets rebuilt, Cassian countered. Isn't that what you want? She stared at him. The man who held all the cards. She needed to see the black box. I agree, Noelle said, her voice sharp. I will take your 6-week contract, but I have one condition. I want full, unrestricted access to Pure Arcadia. Every manifest, every ledger. Cassian nodded. Done. And the basement, Noelle added. I want the security plans for the basement level. The room went utterly still. Cassian's neutral expression tightened. He studied her, a long, unnerving silence stretching between them. He was recalculating. He had offered her the books, but she had asked for the keys to his fortress. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. Done. The pact was sealed, the line had been drawn, a dangerous, taut wire. He held the power, she held the numbers, and she had just agreed to walk into the lion's den to see if she could find a wolf. Pure Arcadia at 2 a.m. was a city of steel skeletons. The air was thick with salt and the cold, metallic smell of the harbor. Noelle had demanded this impromptu audit of the manifests, and Cassian, true to his word, had cleared the pier. It was just them and his 2 most trusted security men, who kept a respectful distance. The rain had started again, a biting mist that slicked the concrete. Cassian held open a heavy black raincoat. It was not an order, but an offering. She slid her arms in, the quilted lining still carrying his residual warmth. He settled it onto her shoulders, his fingers brushing the collar by her hair. It was a functional, impersonal touch, yet it sent a tremor down her spine. He walked beside her, not touching but occupying the space next to her. The gap between them was a taut wire, a charged silence that felt more intimate than a conversation. Noelle kept her focus on the ledgers, her voice crisp as she cross-referenced container numbers. This one, SC449. The manifest says textiles, but the weight is logged at 3 tons over standard. Cassian merely nodded to one of his men, who produced a bolt cutter. Noelle watched Cassian. He was infuriatingly a man of his word. He observed her warnings about chain of custody. He did not interrupt her methodology. And he did not touch her, but she felt his gaze. When a sudden gust of wind swept across the open pier, she instinctively pulled the large coat tighter. His eyes tracked the movement, noted the sharp, involuntary intake of her breath as the cold hit her. He was watching her. She realized, the same way she watched his balance sheets looking for the slightest discrepancy, the hidden vulnerability. Headlights cut through the rain, a dark sedan pulled onto the tarmac, and Julian Rhodes emerged, holding a cardboard tray. I figured an audit at this hour required caffeine, Julian announced, his voice a bright contrast to the heavy night. He offered the tray. Cassian, black, 2 sugars. Noelle, I took a guess. Hot, dark, and probably smarter than I am. Black coffee, 1 splash of cream. Noelle paused, thrown by the accuracy. Thank you. He's the charming one, Cassian said, his voice flat as he took his own cup. And he's the one who saves people, Julian retorted lightly, leaning against the car. He pushed up the sleeve of his expensive sweater to check his watch, and the motion revealed a pale, thin scar just above his wrist. You should have seen him about 10 years ago. We had a disagreement with some partners in the North End. Got messy. Cassian here. He took a bottle meant for my head, carried me 3 blocks to a safe car, and didn't let the doc leave my side for a week. Noelle looked from the scar on Julian's wrist to Cassian's impassive face. She saw the 2 versions of the same man. Julian was the warm, vibrant glow of the city's streetlights, easy to look at, easy to believe. Cassian was the deep, resonant thrum of the pier itself, the heavy, unseen engine of a container ship passing in the dark. The audit moved inside, to the refrigerated warehouse, Warehouse B. The air was instantly frigid, and the harsh fluorescent lights overhead hummed, one of them flickering erratically. Noelle was running her finger down a row of seals on a refrigerated unit when the faulty light buzzed, sparked, and died. The aisle plunged into a disorienting, near-total darkness. She stepped back, her boots searching for clear ground, and found only a patch of slick ice. Her balance was gone instantly. She didn't fall. Cassian moved faster than she thought possible, in one fluid motion. He dropped his coffee, crossed the 2 feet between them, and his arms were around her. One hand clamped onto her waist, the other on her upper arm, pulling her back from the edge of the pallet and flush against the solid wall of his chest. He stabilized her, his body a rigid anchor in the dark. The cold air vanished, replaced by the staggering heat of him. And just as quickly, his grip began to loosen. He had caught her. The danger was over, and he was preparing to release her. But he hesitated. He held her, suspended in that half-second between rescue and release. "May I?" His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the hum of the freezers. It was a question of staggering complexity. "May I hold you? May I continue this?" Her heart was hammering, a frantic bird against the cage of her ribs. She was pinned between the cold steel of the shelf and the solid warmth of his body. She couldn't speak. She just gave a single, sharp nod. His arm tightened. It wasn't a pull, not an act of possession. It was an acceptance. He simply held her, shielding her from the cold, letting the moment stretch. She tilted her chin up. He looked down. In the flashing rhythm of the dying bulb, she saw his eyes, dark and focused, fixed on her mouth. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. His forehead came to rest against hers. His free hand rose, his glove brushing the hair back from her cold cheek. The smell of his skin, clean and sharp like the winter air, filled her senses. He waited. When he finally kissed her, it was a slow exploration, a question asked in the language of pressure and warmth. It was tentative, profoundly respectful, and devastatingly thorough. It was a promise of heat in a cold place, a statement of intent rather than an act of possession. He pulled back, only an inch, his forehead still resting against hers, their breath clouded in the air between them. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pressed a thin, heavy card into her hand, a black key card. "Temporary access," he said, his voice thick. "It mirrors my own clearance." She looked at the card, then back at him. "Where you want to go," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I clear the path. When you do not want it, I revoke it." They left the warehouse minutes later, the air between them vibrating. As they crossed the open yard, a new sound emerged, the high-pitched, electric whine of a motor. Cassian stopped, his head snapping up. "What is that?" A small, 4-rotor drone with a blinking red light appeared over the roof of the warehouse. It hovered, stabilized, and pointed its camera directly at them. A civilian model. Someone was watching. Cassian didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, not her waist, her hand, and pulled her hard, 20 feet into the deep shadows of an arched loading bay. He pushed her back against the cold concrete wall, shielding her with his own body. His hand was splayed flat across her back, just below her shoulder blades. It was not too high, not too low. It was protective, not personal. He was rigid, scanning the rooftops, his body a solid shield. The drone hovered for another second, then zipped away, disappearing over the water. Cassian did not move for a long time. Noelle could feel the tension in his muscles, the adrenaline thrumming through him. "You always plan an exit," she whispered, her voice shaky against his chest. He eased back, just enough to look down at her. His face was all shadows and sharp angles. "Only," he replied, his voice quiet and intense, "when the person I am protecting wants one." For 3 weeks, Noelle lived in a fortress of data. Cassian had given her an office, a terminal with sanitized access, and a clear mandate: find the leak. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by bad coffee and a cold, simmering rage. The money trail that started at the Seaport Commons did not, as she initially believed, terminate at Pier Arcadia. It was a stopover. The funds were being washed again, through a third entity she had missed from the outside, the Vesper Lane Art Fund. On paper, it was a respectable philanthropic venture, funding public murals and artist grants, but Noelle spent 2 days buried in its bylaws, a document so dense it was designed to repel scrutiny. She found the needle in the haystack on page 81, Regulation 17. It was a brilliant piece of legal poison, a clause that allowed the fund's directors to reclassify hospitality and promotional expenses as critical infrastructure renewal. It was a magic trick. Money spent on champagne and galas could be digitally filed as money spent on concrete and wiring. She dug deeper. The payments out of Vesper Lane, the ones labeled infrastructure, were all going to one vendor, Radian Shield Security. Her blood ran cold. She cross-referenced the name. Radian Shield Security was also the primary security contractor for the Harbor Light Trust. It was the same vendor, billing 2 different roads entities for the same nebulous services. Someone was double-dipping, using Vesper Lane as a personal slush fund, and the missing Commons money was the seed capital. An email popped up on her screen. It was from Julian. Subject apologies again. Noelle, the message read. I cannot stop thinking about the awful misunderstanding at the gala. I want you to know I am fully supportive of your audit. I was looking through some old philanthropic files and found this. It's from about 5 years ago, long before the Commons tragedy, but it relates to the Vesper Lane Fund, signed by our old CFO, the one before Marta. Maybe it helps. J. Attached was a high-resolution photo of a single catering invoice from 5 years prior. It was for a Vesper Lane donor event. Stapled to it was a disbursement approval signed by a chief accountant Noelle knew had taken an abrupt, permanent medical leave 2 years ago. It was a dead end, a nice gesture, but irrelevant. She was about to close it when she zoomed in, her forensic instincts kicking in. It was not the signature that caught her eye. It was a handwritten note in the margin, a notation, just 2 words, as discussed. The handwriting was clean, elegant, and slanted distinctly to the left. The next morning, Noelle called a meeting with Cassian and Marta Vale. The current chief financial officer of Harbor Light, Marta was a severe woman in her 50s, loyal to Cassian to a fault, and she viewed Noelle as an infection. Noelle laid out the Vesper Lane ledgers on the conference table. The Vesper Lane Art Fund is a ghost ledger. Marta, Noelle began, her voice sharp and clear, like a gavel strike. It's being used to approve invisible expenses. Regulation 17B is a loophole wide enough to drive a truck through, and you are the one driving. Marta went rigid. I resent that accusation. All Vesper Lane accounts are balanced. Every hospitality expense is being reclassified as infrastructure, Noelle cut her off, sliding a printout across the table. Radian Shield Security. You paid them $3.2 million from this fund in the last 6 months for consulting. They also billed Harbor Light for active patrols at the same properties. You are paying the same company twice, from 2 different pockets. It is a classic internal bleed. That is preposterous, Marta snapped. Is it? Noelle pushed the final ledger. The Seaport Commons funds were the test. They went in, got washed through Vesper Lane, and paid out to Radian Shield. Your signature is on the final transfer. Marta Vale turned white. She looked to Cassian, who sat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask of cold neutrality. Cassian, this is insane, Marta pleaded. Cassian's eyes remained fixed on Noelle. Show me. Noelle pointed to the signature line. It was Marta's, a tight, precise script. But Noelle's gaze was drawn to the top corner of the invoice, a small, handwritten checkmark and a date. Just a small notation, made by the person who had physically handed the file to Marta for her signature. Noelle's breath hitched. She picked up her phone and opened Julian's email. She laid the phone on the table, zooming in on the 5-year-old invoice he had sent. The same margin note, as discussed. She looked at the new invoice, the same checkmark, the same left-leaning script. It wasn't Marta's handwriting, it was Julian's. Marta, seeing Noelle's focus shift, paled further. I only approve what is put on my desk, Mr. Rhodes. The preliminary authorizations come from, what? No. Cassian slammed his hand flat on the table. The sound was not loud, but it was absolute. The room fell into a dead, terrified silence. He stared at the invoice, then at the phone. His jaw muscle pulsed. A single, violent twitch. His voice, when he spoke, was lethally quiet. You think I don't see that? He looked up, not at Noelle, but at Marta. Marta, get out. The CFO all but ran from the room. Cassian rose, walked to the door, and locked it. He turned to Noelle, his eyes no longer cold, but burning. Call him, Cassian ordered. Who? My brother. Julian arrived 5 minutes later, his expression open and slightly confused. Cassian, Noelle, what's wrong? Marta looked like she'd seen a ghost. Cassian didn't speak. He just pointed to the 2 documents on the table, the 5-year-old email attachment and the new, damning invoice. Julian's gaze fell on the files. The color drained from his face. He looked at Cassian, his expression crumbling. Cassian, it was one time. Explain? Cassian said the word was ice. The Riverbend Sanctuary, Julian said, his voice pleading. 5 years ago. You remember, the city was going to bulldoze it. It was a shelter. I asked you for the funds, and you said no. It was a bad investment. So I found another way. He looked at Noelle. I used Vesper Lane. I used Regulation 17B to hide the donation, to get it past the auditors. It saved the shelter. It was one shortcut. Cassia, I swear it, to do something good. And the invoice you sent me this morning? Noelle asked, her voice quiet. The one with your handwriting? I was trying to help, Julian said, desperation creeping in. I thought maybe Marta was using the same loophole. I didn't know how deep it went. I was trying to point you in the right direction without admitting you wrote the playbook. Noelle finished, the two-sided reality hitting her. She looked at Cassian. Your brother's shortcut to save a shelter became a 6-lane highway. He showed someone the back door, and they have been bleeding you dry ever since. Cassian stood motionless. He stared at his brother, the silence stretching for a full minute, heavy and suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was not angry. It was the sound of a judge passing sentence. Vesper Lane is dissolved, effective in 48 hours, he announced. Turning to his terminal, a live forensic audit is now open on every related charitable account, every single one. He looked at Julian, then at Noelle, his gaze settling on his brother. Whoever did this, Cassian stated, his voice a flat, cold promise, has until the audit is complete to disappear, if they are still here when I find them. He paused, his eyes like steel. They lose a hand. The Vesper Lane audit was not a quiet affair. Cassian's order to freeze the accounts had sent a shockwave through Boston's philanthropic elite. By the end of the 48 hours, the press had caught the scent. Noelle found herself the unwilling subject of grainy telephoto lenses. The mystery woman exiting the Harbor Light Trust Tower. Photographers shouted questions at her, at Julian, at anyone who looked official. This is untenable. Cassian stated on the 3rd day. He found her in the glass-walled office where she was fielding panicked calls from the Vesper Lane board. You cannot work. I can work through a little noise, she retorted, rubbing her temples. This isn't noise, this is a threat, he said. They are trying to identify you, to discredit you before you find the truth. You are compromised. He took the tablet from her hands. We are leaving. He took her, not to a safe house, but to Franklin Bluff, a high, windswept observatory on the edge of the city limits, long since closed to the public. He had a key. The main observation room was circular, walled in glass, cold and smelling of pine and distant rain. The city was a glittering tapestry of light far below. They were completely alone. Why are we here, Cassian? To be honest, he said, turning from the glass. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. You have analyzed my company. Now analyze me. They spoke for hours. The confessions were quiet, stripped of the armor they wore in the city. Noelle told him about her mother, about the small apartment, the smell of burnt wiring that still haunted her. She always told me, Noelle, don't ever let anyone choose for you, Noelle said, her voice soft, her gaze lost in the lights below. Not your job, not your life, not your ending. When she died in that fire, I felt like her choice had been stolen, and the IO tried to steal mine. They told me to stop. This isn't just about money for me. It's about taking that choice back. Cassian was silent for a long time. He watched the rain begin to trace patterns on the glass. My father was a cruel man, he said, his voice a low rumble. He built this empire not with vision, but with fear. He taught Julian to smile and me to count, but he only had one virtue. He kept his word, always. He looked at his hands, as if seeing his father in them. The last time I saw him, he was dying. He grabbed my arm, pulled me close, and said, "Don't you ever break a promise. Cassian, not for God, not for money, not even for your brother." And I never have. Noelle finally understood. The coldness, the rigid adherence to their 6-week deal, the fury at Julian. It wasn't just a betrayal of business, it was a violation of Cassian's entire code. The silence that fell between them was no longer heavy, but heavy with truth. He stood only a few feet away, the tension that had defined them, the hunter and the boss, the analyst and the suspect had evaporated, leaving only a man and a woman. "Noelle," he said. It was just her name, but it held the weight of a plea. He didn't move. He simply waited. He was giving her the choice. She was the one who stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. She looked up at him, into the eyes that had terrified her at the gala, and she nodded. Just once. He raised a hand, his movement slow, deliberate. He did not touch her skin. His fingers grazed her hair, brushing it back from her face. "Is this allowed?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded again. She took his hand, the one that had been near her face, and guided it to her shoulder, placing it firmly on her collarbone. She held it there, letting him feel the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. When he kissed her, it was with the same devastating, slow precision he applied to everything. It was a deep, thorough kiss that tasted of the cold night air and a desperate, banked warmth. There was no hurry, no demand. He was learning her, mapping her, and allowing himself to be learned in return. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. "You are trembling." "So are you," she whispered. In the corner of the observation room was a small, private alcove, hidden from the main glass, containing a long leather couch and a fireplace. He led her there. He ignited the gas fireplace with a click, and the room was filled with a low, flickering light. A thick wool blanket was folded on the arm of the couch. He sat, and she sat beside him. He did not pull her close. He simply opened his arm, and she moved into the space he offered, resting her head against his shoulder. He draped the heavy wool blanket over them both, enclosing them in a small, warm world. They lay like that, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the rain lash the glass. He kissed her again, slow and deep, his hand cupping her jaw. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart through the fine wool of his suit jacket. Every touch was respectful, every movement a question, every kiss an answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a rescue keychain, a solid piece of brushed steel, engraved with a single phrase, "If scared, squeeze twice." "My security team," he explained, pressing it into her palm. "It connects to them, and to me. It is always on. It gives you sovereignty, the right to stop." Noelle closed her fingers around the cool metal. She looked at him, at this man of terrifying control, who was offering her the one thing she valued most, the choice. "I don't belong to you, Cassian," she whispered, the words both a warning and a clarification. His gaze held hers. He brought her hand, the one holding the keychain, to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "No," he said, his voice absolute. "You belong to yourself, and I belong to the words you speak when you need them." For the first time since her mother's death, Noelle felt safe. They lay there, the city lights blurred by the rain, their breathing slowing, their hands intertwined on his chest. For the first time in their lives, two people built on control and guarded by walls fell asleep shoulder to shoulder, in a room with an unlocked door. The morning came too soon, bright and clear, the storm having passed. Noelle woke first, feeling the heavy warmth of his arm draped protectively over her waist. He was asleep, his face stripped of its harshness, looking almost peaceful. A phone buzzed on the floor, a sharp, insistent sound. Cassian was awake instantly. The transformation was immediate. The guard was back. He grabbed the phone, looked at the screen, and his face went hard. "What is it?" Noelle asked, sitting up, the blanket pooling in her lap. He stood, already walking to the window, the phone pressed to his ear. "Say it again," he commanded. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were chips of ice. "The Vesper Lane servers," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "They were wiped clean an hour ago. Every file, every ledger, every transaction." The insider had struck first. The descent from Franklin Bluff was a silent, high-speed fall back to reality. They didn't speak. The intimacy of the night, the shared confessions, had been shattered by the clinical, cold light of the morning's breach. They returned to the Harbor Light conference room. The view of the city was now an unwelcome reminder of their exposure. "It was a surgical wipe," Noelle said, her fingers a blur across the keyboard of her laptop. She was pulling thermal imaging from the server room, access logs, anything. They didn't just delete the files, they used a data scrubber. It was timed. "Cassian, it was activated the moment your 48-hour deadline expired." Cassian stood at the window, a statue carved from shadow and rage. Who knew the deadline? "Everyone on the Vesper board knew about the audit," Noelle said, her mind racing. "But the hard seizure, the plan to physically take the servers today, only the people in this room when you gave the order." He turned slowly. "Me, you, my brother, and the operator," Noelle added, tapping her screen. "The people who manage the physical hardware, the ones who received your official stop work notice yesterday. Radiant Shield security." Cassian's hand was already on his phone. Marta confirmed the Vesper servers had a cold storage backup, a smart safe. It was designed to ping its location if the primary server was breached without the proper authorization codes. "It's a dead man's switch," Noelle whispered. "It just came online," Cassian said, his voice lethally calm. He dialed his head of security. "Where is it?" The reply was clipped. "Container Yard 27, Berth 4. It's on the move." The black sedan tore through the industrial district, Julian's car a dark echo right behind them. Container Yard. 27 was a canyon city of rust-colored steel, smelling of diesel and salt. "There," Cassian's driver said, pointing. The signal on Noelle's tablet was flashing red, moving toward the water. They skidded to a halt on the gravel. A figure in dark tactical gear was visible 200 yards away, scaling the side of a towering stack of blue containers, moving with practiced efficiency. "He's heading for the water," Noelle said, analyzing the yard's layout. "The berth. He's not escaping by land." Cassian was already out of the car, his own security team fanning out, weapons low and ready. "Hold your fire!" Noelle ran, not after the figure, but parallel to him. She saw the iron ladder on the side of an adjacent stack and began to climb, her heels digging for purchase. She heard Cassian curse and follow her. From the top of the container, 5 stories up, the wind tore at her. She could see the figure, now running along the top of the containers. Below, a small, powerful tugboat idled. The figure reached the edge, looked back, and saw Cassian's men aiming from the ground. The masked person raised one hand, palm out, a universal "don't shoot." A heavy-gauge zip line, normally used for loading crews, was stretched from the container stack to the pier. The figure clipped on and slid, a dark shape descending rapidly toward the tugboat's deck. Julian Cassian barked into his comms, climbing onto the container top beside Noel. The bow cut him off. Below, Julian's car roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it sped down the pier, angling to block the tugboat from casting off. The figure landed on the deck and immediately scrambled to untie the mooring lines. "We lose him. We lose the data," Cassian said. The gap from the pier to the boat was 6 feet of churning, oily water. Noelle didn't wait for permission. She ran to the edge of the pier. Noelle stopped. She jumped. She landed hard on the wet deck, her ankle twisting, but she rolled with the impact, coming up on one knee. The masked figure spun, startled, raising a hand. It did not hold a weapon. It held a single, black, military-grade USB drive. Cassian landed a second later, a silent, heavy impact, positioning himself between Noelle and the figure. Don't throw it," Noelle yelled, holding up her hands. "It's useless to you." The figure hesitated. "The checksum," Noelle called out, her voice sharp over the engine's thrum. "The metadata on the drive is incomplete. The server wipe was clean, but the transfer failed before the verification file was appended. You know it, don't you?" The figure in the mask stilled. "You're not the master," Noelle pressed, pushing to her feet. "You're the courier. You were sent to retrieve the backup, not destroy it. You're just the transport, and your boss just set you up." Slowly, the figure reached up and pulled off the black balaclava. It was a woman, her hair cropped short, her face hard with adrenaline. "Tamsin Crow," Cassian said, his voice a low growl of recognition. "My mid-level liaison at Radian Shield." "I got the order. Mr. Rhodes," Tamsin said, her eyes darting between Cassian and the pier. "A gull-wing alert. Priority 1. Retrieve the package, scrub the premises, await extraction." "Gull-wing?" Noelle asked. "The alias," Tamsin spat. "The one who pays the off-ledger bonuses." A sharp, high-velocity crack split the air. It wasn't a shot at them. It was a warning. From a sniper positioned on the warehouse roof they had just passed. Tamsin flinched violently. "It's a setup. He's cleaning house." "Get down," Cassian roared. He didn't push Noelle. He enveloped her. In one violent, fluid motion, he spun her, slamming her back into the narrow, steel-walled recess of the tugboat's cabin. He covered her entirely, his body a solid shield, his back to the yard. A second shot pinged, striking the steel bulkhead exactly where Noelle had been standing. She was crushed against him, her face pressed into the fabric of his coat, smelling the cold air and the faint scent of his skin. She could feel his entire body vibrating, not with fear, but with a massive, contained surge of adrenaline. His back muscles were iron hard, braced for an impact that never came. "I will not," he breathed, his voice a low, fierce promise in her ear. "Let a single one touch you." "He's going to kill us all," Tamsin shrieked, in a fit of pure panic. She reared back and hurled the USB drive, end over end, in a high arc toward the dark water. "No!" Noelle screamed. She ripped herself out from under Cassian's protection. She saw the small black object silhouetted against the gray sky, already beginning its descent. She lunged, not for the drive, but for the boat's safety gear. Her eyes locked on a magnetic retrieval line, a heavy magnet on a coiled rope, used for fetching tools from the harbor floor. She grabbed the magnet. She didn't aim. She didn't have time. She just swung, a desperate, underhand toss, releasing the line into the open air. The rope went taut. The USB drive, its metal casing glinting, slammed into the face of the magnet with a sharp, audible click. It stuck. The drive dangled, safe, 3 feet above the churning water. The sniper's shot stopped. Noelle could feel her entire body shaking, slowly hauled in the line. She looked up. Cassian was staring at her. The fury was gone. The cold control was gone. He was looking at her as if for the first time, his expression stripped bare to raw, stunned respect. On the pier, Julian stood by his car, gun raised, scanning the rooftops. "Sniper's gone," he shouted, his voice tight. "Are you hit? Are you safe?" But as he watched Noelle clutch the small, dark drive in her hand, his gaze wavered. For just 1 second, his eyes, usually so bright, went dull and opaque, clouded by an expression Noelle could not begin to read. The boardroom at the Fenwick Tower was silent, the air so thin it felt pressurized. This was neutral ground, the high-altitude territory of old-world lawyers and city trustees. The entire executive board of the Harbor Light Trust was present, their faces pale and strained. At the head of the table, Noelle plugged the recovered USB drive into her laptop. "The drive was compromised," she announced, her voice echoing in the vast room. "The core ledgers were wiped during the transfer, but the metadata was not. The digital fingerprints, the logs of who accessed the backup, and when, and from where." She projected a complex flowchart onto the room's main screen. It was a spider web of IP addresses, encrypted routing paths, and ghost terminals. At the absolute center of the web, glowing in red, was a single alias Gullwing. "Tamsin Crow was telling the truth," Noelle continued. "She was activated by Gullwing. For the past 3 years, this alias has been authorizing and mirroring the transactions from Vesper Lane, Radiant Shield, and at least 4 other offshore accounts. The Seaport Commons money was just the most recent." She hit a key. The complex web of IPs collapsed, resolving into a single name, a single title. "The alias," Noelle said, her voice dropping, "is registered to the primary terminal of Mr. Orion Cade, the Harbor Light Trust's chief ethics advisor." The shock was tangible, a physical drop in the room's temperature. Marta Vale let out a small, strangled gasp. Cassian, at the far end of the table, did not move. He did not blink. Noelle watched Julian. He, too, was perfectly still, his face ashen, his gaze fixed not on the screen, but on his own hands, clasped on the polished mahogany. Orion Cade, a distinguished man in his late 60s with a calm, professorial air, looked at Noelle. He did not look angry or afraid. He looked impressed. He steepled his fingers, leaned forward, and smiled. "You are a truly gifted accountant, Miss Hart," he said, his voice as smooth as aged port. "But you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of this ecosystem. You see theft, I see preservation." "I see fraud," Noelle countered, her blood cold. "I see a necessary tax," Orion said, addressing the entire room. "I extracted excess volatile capital to keep the entire system stable, to ensure our political allies remained funded, to ensure our competitors remained cooperative. The money I moved was used to protect Harbor Light from itself. Every single one of you." His gaze swept the table, benefited from the stability I provided. Cassian's jaw was a ridge of granite. His silence was more terrifying than any shout. Noelle looked back at Julian. His silence was different. It was the silence of a man holding his breath. And she suddenly realized the receipt, the helpful email Julian had sent her, the 5-year-old invoice. It was the key. The first thread that had led her to Vesper Lane, which led her to Radiant Shield, which led her to Orion. Julian hadn't been an unwitting pawn. He had suspected. He had been too afraid to challenge Orion himself, so he had aimed Noelle, an external, expendable auditor, at the problem and pulled the trigger. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Orion," Cassian finally said, his voice lethally quiet, "you are relieved of your duties." "You cannot," Orion began to bluster. "I can," Cassian said. "Security will escort you to your office. You will not touch your terminal. You are finished." Later that night, the wind whipped across the private rooftop terrace of Cassian's penthouse. The city lights glittered below, cold and distant. "He was my father's most trusted advisor," Cassian said, his voice a low gravel. He stared at the harbor, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat. "He taught me how to read a contract. He was a second father to Julian." Julian knew. Noel said it was not a question. Cassian nodded, his gaze unwavering. He suspected. He didn't have proof, and he was a coward, so he used you. He pointed a loaded weapon at the monster in his closet and hoped you would take the shot. A cold spike of fear and anger shot through Noel. What if he was more than a coward? Cassian, that shortcut he took. What if Orion knew about it? What if Julian is complicit? This was the true test. Cassian turned to face her, the city lights carving his face into harsh angles. His control was absolute, but she could see the agony in his eyes. "If Julian is involved," he said, the words torn from him, "if his hands are dirty, I will still choose the law." "Your law?" "My father's code. You keep your word. You protect the family. But justice." He paused. "Justice has its own weight. I will not protect him from this. If he is guilty, I will stand aside and let you, or the IO, or God himself do what is necessary." He was choosing his code over his blood. The admission hung in the frigid air, a raw, painful confession. She stepped toward him, seeing not the boss, not the bully, but the man, trapped in the cage his father had built. She reached up, her bare hand touching his cold, rigid jaw. He flinched, then leaned into her touch, a small, involuntary sigh escaping him. He captured her hand, turning his head to press a fierce, desperate kiss into her palm before pulling her to him. The kiss was not like the one at the pier or the observatory. This was not a question. It was an anchor. It was a raw, aching need for one solid thing in a world that was fracturing around him. His phone buzzed. Not a ring, a short, sharp, triple vibration alert. He tore himself away from her instantly. The guard was back, the mask of control slamming down. He read the text. His entire body went rigid. "What?" Noel asked, her heart hammering. "Orion is not working alone," he said, his voice flat. "He has partners. They've just put a surveillance team on Zia Beatrice." "You're—" "The woman who raised us. Our aunt. They're sending a message. They're threatening my family." He grabbed her hand. "We have to move. Now." He bypassed the main elevator, pulling her to a heavy steel door marked Utility. He keyed in a code, revealing a small, dark service elevator. He urged her inside, his hand at the small of her back. As the door slid shut, he stood opposite her, his hand remaining in the air near her, a gesture of protection, not possession. Noel looked at him, at this man of impossible contradictions, the passionate kiss, the cold duty. "This is your life, isn't it?" she said, her voice quiet in the small, descending box. "Intimacy, interrupted by duty, always." "Yes," he said, his jaw tight. "I can live with that," Noel said, meeting his gaze. "I don't need the promises. I just need the truth." The elevator stopped. It opened not into a lobby, but into a sterile, beautifully furnished apartment that had the cold, unused feel of a safe house. "Orion's partners won't find us here," he said. He walked to a large mirror, slid it aside, and revealed a heavy wall safe. He punched in a code. He turned to her, his face grim. "The sniper at the yard, the team on my aunt. Orion was the brain, but this is the muscle. I don't know who they are, which means I am vulnerable. And so are you." He pulled a small, black hard drive from the safe. "What is that?" "A mirror of my own system," and he said, "The real books, everything, every account, every shell, every deal my father made and every one I've made since. The truth." He pressed the drive into her hands. It was heavy. "It's the evidence that would send me to prison for 30 years, he said. "Cassian, why—" "The code to the safe is 0814, the day my mother died." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes burning into hers. "If I fall, Noel, if I am arrested or if I am killed, you publish it. You take it to the IIO. You burn Harbor Light to the ground. No exceptions. Not for me, not for Julian." He was giving her the weapon to destroy him. "You are handing me your life," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I am handing you the truth," he replied. "Promise me." This was not a promise of love. It was a pact of transparency. "I promise," she said. The safe house was as quiet as a vacuum for 6 hours. Noelle worked, plugging the truth drive Cassian had given her into her own secure, air-gapped laptop. She ran a differential analysis, comparing the complete data from Cassian's drive against the fragmented metadata she'd recovered from Tamsin Crow's USB. The discrepancy hit her like a physical blow. Orion Cade Gullwing had not just found Julian's 5-year-old Vesper Lane shortcut, he had weaponized it. Julian's account had been the smokescreen. Orion had studied Julian's digital habits, his tendency to e-sign invoices from his tablet, his rapid approvals for community projects, and replicated that exact digital pathway. He had created a ghost of Julian in the system, a backdoor that mirrored his digital signature, allowing Orion to authorize massive, fraudulent transfers that looked like Julian's impulsive philanthropy. Julian had left the key in the lock, and Orion had spent 3 years robbing the house. Julian was not a co-conspirator. He was the perfect frame. She had to find him. He wasn't answering his phone. She called Cassian's head of security, the one who had monitored the keychain. "I need to find Julian. It's not a request. It's a security imperative." The man was silent, clearly weighing his loyalties. "He has a place, an old recording studio in the Leather District. He goes there when he doesn't want to be a Rhodes." The studio was abandoned, smelling of cold dust, damp plaster, and old electronics. In the center of the vast soundproofed main room, under a single, dim spotlight, sat a gleaming black grand piano. Julian was playing. The music was complex, melancholic, and jarringly beautiful. He stopped, his hands hovering over the keys. As her footsteps echoed in the silence, he looked up, his face gaunt, shadowed by the single light. "You shouldn't be here, Noelle." "He framed you," she said, walking toward the piano. She stopped, leaving 10 feet of dusty floor between them. "Orion, he used your digital signature. He saw your shortcut 5 years ago and turned it into his personal highway. The Seaport Commons, the Radiant Shield overbilling. It was all him, Julian. But it all has your name on it." Julian looked down at the keys, his shoulders slumping. The confession, when it came, was a broken whisper. It wasn't just the Vesper Lane shelter. It was a community health clinic. 2 years ago, they were going to lose their lease. It was only $50,000. I moved it from a holdings account. I did it on my tablet. I e-signed the transfer, categorized it as janitorial. It was easy. He looked up, his eyes hollow with a terrible, dawning comprehension. "Orion helped me. He fixed the paperwork for me. He called it taking care of the family. He wasn't fixing it. He was studying it. He was learning my signature." "He knew you were impulsive," Noelle said, the pieces clicking. "He knew you were the only one who would sign off on a community project without reading the fine print. You were his perfect cover." Julian's phone, resting on the piano's polished lid, began to ring. It was not a normal ringtone, but a harsh, digital chime. He stared at it in terror. That's not a number. It's a secure line. Orion set it up." "Answer it," Noelle said. "Put it on speaker." Julian's shaking hand tapped the screen. "Hello?" A voice, distorted by encryption, filled the studio. "Mr. Rhodes, we see you are no longer under Orion's protection. A pity." "Who is this?" Julian whispered. "We are the Coterie Black Star, Orion's muscle, and his former partners. We find ourselves in a difficult position. Orion is gone, and he has left an outstanding balance." "I have nothing to do with that," Julian said, his voice cracking. "You have everything to do with it," the voice hissed. "You are the key. We want what he promised us, the full data, the real Harbor Light ledgers, not the compromised trash Cade tried to sell us. You will deliver it." I don't have it," Julian stammered. "Then find it," the voice said, "or we will collect on our balance in person. We know where you play the piano. Julian, we know where your Zia Beatrice buys her groceries. You have 24 hours. The line went dead. Julian doubled over, a dry, racking sob tearing from him. "They'll kill me! Cassian, they'll kill him! Oh God, what have I done?" Noelle's mind was racing, her forensic instincts kicking in. They are not threatening you for money, Julian. They are threatening you for an asset, for data. They think you are the key. I am. So we changed the lock, she said. She grabbed his phone and opened his banking app. We make you worthless. What? They want an asset. We turn you into a negative asset, a liability. Her fingers were flying across the screen. We are going to execute a financial death. Right now, we file for immediate Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. We liquidate your holdings. We freeze your credit. Report all your cards stolen. We transfer all your accessible funds, every dime, into an escrow account for the Seaport Commons restoration. We sever your signature authority from every Harbor Light account. She looked at him, her eyes fierce. When they come for you, you won't be a key. You'll be a broke, disinherited pariah with no access and no authority. You will be worth less to them alive than dead. It's the only way. He's right. Cassian's voice came from the shadows by the door. He stepped into the light, his face a mask of profound, tragic exhaustion. He had heard it all. He walked past Noelle, stopping directly in front of his brother. Julian, still seated at the piano, looked up at him, his face streaked with tears. Cassian, I'm sorry. Cassian didn't speak. He just looked at his younger brother, the man he had protected his entire life, the man who had, through weakness, almost destroyed them. He reached out and placed his hand on Julian's shoulder, a gesture of both support and finality. He said the most difficult words of his life. From now on, you have no signature at Harbor Light. Julian's breath hitched. He nodded, a single, sharp, understanding movement. He covered Cassian's hand with his own, squeezing it. I understand, thank you. It was an execution and an absolution in one. The end of Julian Rhodes, two brothers, choosing to sever power to save a life. That night, back at the safe house, the storm returned, lashing the reinforced windows with rain. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a deep, aching void. Noelle and Cassian sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the city's distant, blurred glow. Neither of them spoke. The weight of Julian's sacrifice, of Cassian's choice, filled the room. Cassian reached for her, his hand finding hers in the dark. He pulled her, not to the bed, but down onto the thick rug in front of the cold fireplace. He laid down, pulling her with him. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, his face buried in her hair. She could feel the tremors running through his body, the rigid control finally breaking. She held him just as tightly, her hands splayed across his broad back, a silent anchor in the storm. They lay like that for a long time, the rain their only soundtrack. He eased back, just enough to look at her in the dim light. His eyes were raw. He kissed her, a slow, deep, reassuring press of his mouth to hers. It was a kiss that spoke of grief, of fear, and of a desperate, grounding need. It was a kiss of survival. She kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his hair, their hands clasping tightly between them. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath fogging in the cool air. I won't win this fight because I am strong, he whispered, his voice rough, his admission tearing through the dark. I will win it, because you showed me how not to lose. The plan was born in the sterile quiet of the safe house, built from the two hard drives, Cassian's truth, and Orion's compromised metadata. Noelle called it the water mirror. We are not going to catch them, Cassian, she explained, her face illuminated by the glow of 3 linked laptops. We are going to make them catch themselves, and we're going to make them pay for the Seaport Commons while they do it. The plan was a high-stakes financial maneuver, a form of intellectual aikido. Orion and his partners, the coterie Black Star, were desperate. Julian's public, sudden bankruptcy leaked to the financial press by Noelle herself had rendered their primary target worthless. They could no longer blackmail Julian for access. Cassian, meanwhile, had initiated a full, system-wide lockdown, freezing every account Orion had ever touched. This left the thieves with only one option: the Vesper Lane backup, the data Tamsin Crow had failed to extract. "They're coming for Tamsin," Noelle said. "They have to. She's the only loose end, the only one who knows the backup's location." Cassian's security team found Tamsin Crow hiding in a motel. Cassian made her the offer himself: cooperate, and he would position her as a state's witness. Refuse, and he would drop her at the nearest police station with Tamsin's own signed transfer logs. She agreed. The bait was not a hard drive. It was a burner phone, loaded by Noelle with a security verification app. In reality, it was a sophisticated keylogger. "Blackstar won't just take the data," Noelle reasoned. "Orion is too paranoid. He will want to access it himself. To verify it's real, Tamsin will tell them this phone is the only key. When he enters his credentials, we have him." But the true genius of the plan was the mirror. "We're routing their connection through the city's main philanthropic payment gateway," Noelle said. She had contacted her one trusted colleague from the IIO, the head of the beta test division, and framed it as a corporate stress test. The moment Orion's credentials hit the system, it will trigger two actions. 1, it logs his digital signature with the IIO. 2, it reflects his transaction. He thinks he's pulling data from an offshore server. The water mirror will push a massive, simultaneous wire transfer from his primary offshore account directly into the Seaport Commons Restoration Fund. He's going to sign his own confession and pay for his own crimes. The meet was set for midnight at the Helix Bridge, a massive, half-finished construction project connecting the harbor to the new financial district. The wind howled through the exposed steel girders, snapping tarps like gunshots. The only light came from portable construction floods, casting harsh, theatrical shadows. Noelle and Cassian were in a construction trailer, the windows covered, watching a bank of monitors. One screen showed Tamsin's feed, another the progress of the keylogger, a third, a simple bank transfer status page. Tamsin stood alone in the center of the bridge, a small, isolated figure. Two black SUVs slid out of the darkness. Orion Cade emerged, flanked by the leader of the coterie Blackstar and two of his men. "You were difficult to find, Miss Crow," Orion said, his voice clipped by the wind. "I have what you want," Tamsin said, holding up the phone. "The data isn't on a drive. It's on a clean server. This is the only key. Scan your credentials. The data transfers to you." Orion sneered, but he was desperate. He took the phone. "My partners," he gestured to the Blackstar leader, "want verification. They do not trust phantoms." "Then scan," Tamsin said. In the trailer, Noelle watched her screen. He's typing his primary access key, his offshore routing number. We have it all." She looked at Cassian. Her heart was a drum. "Now," Cassian said into his comms. Noelle reached into her pocket. She squeezed the steel keychain twice. From the darkness beneath the bridge, from the scaffolding above, Cassian's team materialized. They moved in silence. Not with guns, but with high tensile restraints. They were on the Blackstar grunts in seconds, a swift, non-lethal takedown. Orion looked up from the phone, his face a mask of pure disbelief. Cassian stepped from the trailer, his long coat whipping in the wind. He stopped 10 feet from Orion. "You wanted to keep the system from collapsing. Orion," Cassian's voice boomed, sharp and clear over the wind. "So you decided to hollow it out instead." "You," Orion whispered, recognizing his defeat. "It was you." "No," Cassian said, stepping aside. "It was her." It looked like a clean victory. Cassian's men had the grunts secured. Orion was trapped. But the Blackstar leader had not been secured. He had feigned surrender, and in the chaos, he moved. He ignored Cassian. He ignored Orion. He lunged for the trailer, for the architect. The door burst open. Before Noelle could react, a heavy arm was around her throat, dragging her from the chair. He hauled her out onto the bridge, pressing the cold steel of a pistol to her temple. "Everybody stop," the leader roared, his voice a primal shout. "All of you back off or her brains paint the new concrete." Cassian froze. His team froze, the blood drained from his face. "You trade," the leader yelled, pulling Noelle backward into the unlit, unfinished half of the bridge, a maze of rebar and shadows. "The girl for our exit now. Roads call them off." Cassian took a half step forward, his hands raised. "Let her go. We can make a deal." Noelle's eyes were locked on her laptop screen, still visible through the trailer door. The transfer. Orion's credentials had triggered it, but the file was massive. The progress bar was at 85%. If they let him go, if the connection was broken, the transfer would fail. The IIO log would be incomplete. The money would be lost. Cassian was about to speak, about to sacrifice the entire operation for her. She met his agonizing gaze across the divide. She gave a single, violent shake of her head. "Don't." He didn't understand. The gun pressed harder. Noelle stared at him, her eyes wide, frantic, but clear as a bell. She mouthed the words, a desperate, silent plea. 90 seconds. "Stall, 90 seconds. Cassian understood. He took one step back, raising his hands higher, a perfect picture of surrender. "All right," he called out, his voice straining with false panic. "You win. You win. Just tell me what you want. The money you want, the data, it's yours." The Black Star leader laughed, the sound ugly. "I want my exit, and I'm taking her with me." He was dragging Noelle backward into the darkness, the gun still at her head. But Noelle wasn't fighting him. She was looking past him, at the dark. She was counting the gusts of wind, feeling the rumble of the tidal generators beneath the bridge's pylons. The main construction lights were on a different circuit, but the auxiliary floods on the unfinished side where she was were tied to the temporary grid. They flickered, a steady, predictable pulse. Dim, bright, dim, bright. She saw Tamsin Crow, crouched near the auxiliary breaker box, watching, waiting. Noelle met her gaze. She held up her hand, splaying her fingers. 5. She began to shout at the Black Star leader, her voice high with manufactured terror. "The data, it's streaming. It's on the Open City Hall platform. If you shoot me, you don't just kill me. You make me a martyr. The whole city will see the transfer logs." "Shut up," he roared, tightening his grip. 4. They'll see Orion Cade's name, and they'll see yours. 3. He shook her violently. "I said shut up." 2. The money is gone. It's already in the Seaport Fund. 1. The wind cycle hit its peak. The auxiliary lights flared to their brightest. Now. Noelle dropped her entire weight, driving her heel into the man's instep. As he roared, she screamed, "Tamsin!" Tamsin threw the heavy breaker. The world vanished. The unfinished half of the bridge plunged into absolute, disorienting darkness. The leader, blinded, shoved Noelle away and fired his pistol. A panicked, useless shot that lit the girders in a split-second flash. He was too late. Cassian was already moving. He did not run at the man. He ran at her. He hit her in the dark, a solid, protective tackle that took them both down, skidding behind a concrete barrier. He wrapped his body around her, his hand clamped over the back of her head, shielding her as the sound of a brief, brutal struggle filled the air. There were no more shots, only the thwip of tensile restraints and the heavy grunts of men being subdued. The main lights of the bridge snapped back on, followed by the blinding blue and red of arriving sirens. Cassian's team had the entire Black Star crew secured. And standing near the trailer, his face slack in disbelief, was Orion Cade. He was staring at his phone. The transfer was 100% complete. The IAO team, Noelle's former colleague, alerted by her citizen's tip, was already placing him in cuffs. "It's done," Noelle said, her voice shaking as Cassian helped her to her feet. "It's all done." Orion was trapped. The evidence of his digital signature was securely logged by the IEO. The money he had tried to steal was now irrevocably in the Seaport Commons Fund. He could not deny the crime, and he could not get the money back. It was a clean, perfect failure. A week later, Julian Rhodes sat in a small, bright office overlooking a city park. He signed the last page of his resignation, severing his ties to the Harbor Light Trust forever. He slid the papers across the desk, his face, for the first time in years, looking light. He picked up a different folder, a city-funded contract. His new title was Simple Community Arts Coordinator. He was doing the work he was meant to do, with no dirty money attached. In the Harbor Light boardroom, Cassian stood at the head of the table. The mood was funereal. "As of today," Cassian announced, his voice cold and final, "the Harbor Light Trust is dissolved. We are restructuring as a transparent public benefit corporation. Our books will be open. Our investments will be ethical." A board member sputtered, "Cassian, you can't. Your father—" "My father is gone," Cassian cut him off. "This is the new way. Anyone who disagrees is welcome to accept a buyout of their shares at yesterday's closing price and leave." No one moved. The bloodless coup was complete. The red brick building was new, but it was built to look old, to look like it belonged. The engraved stone above the door read, "The Heart and Harbor Community Center." In the back, a library, smelling of fresh pine and new books, was empty, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Noelle was tracing the spine of a book when Cassian came in. He didn't speak. He just walked up to her, took her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss. A kiss that held the memory of the bridge, the fear of the safe house, and the promise of this room. His hands were warm, one resting on her waist, the other tangled in her hair. She could feel his steady heart, a counterpoint to the hurried beat of her own. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, their breath mingling. "You are a destination," he whispered, his voice rough, "not a prize." She laughed, a sound so bright and easy it startled them both. She pulled him back, her fingers hooking into his suit jacket, and kissed him again. In her happiness, she stumbled back, bumping the librarian's desk, and her hip struck the small, silver service bell on its surface. Ting! The clear sound echoed in the quiet library. They froze, looking at the bell, then at each other, and broke into a shared, uncontrollable laugh. "We need a rule," she said, her voice still brimming with laughter as she traced the lapel of his suit. "For us, for when we disagree." He waited, his expression soft. "We stop," she said, her gaze serious. "We talk and we touch." She placed her hand flat on his chest, right over his heart. Just a hand, a reminder, then we decide. Cassian covered her hand with his own, his thumb rubbing the back of hers. "I accept the terms." The bully, she thought, had finally become a protector. The next morning, the sun rose over the harbor, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet in their apartment. Noelle sat at her desk. She opened a new, blank spreadsheet. In the title field, she typed the honesty ledger. Cassian walked up behind her, placing a steaming mug of coffee on her desk. He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead in a soft, warm kiss. She smiled, leaning her head back against his chest. "A bully in an expensive suit," she murmured, remembering her first words to the wrong brother in what felt like another lifetime. She looked at Cassian, her smile widening. "Yes, he's mine. As long as it's the suit with a heart that knows how to listen to reason." He kissed the top of her head, and Noelle Hart turned back to her screen, ready to build. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to connect with you, so please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you want to help this story be heard by even more people, please support us by hitting the hype button.